Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWireTV interview. I'm joined today by Rob Bryant. He's the Executive Vice President of the APJ region at InEight's. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Alex.
Now, I'm sure that most people who have chosen to watch this video are already familiar with InEight's and its products and services, but can you just give us, a quick rundown of what InEight's is doing in 2021?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to. So, we like to describe ourselves as challenging the way the project teams address the question of collecting and utilizing data on their project. And essentially what we provide is an end-to-end solution through the whole project lifecycle. So whether you're at the beginning and you're doing your initial scheduling and planning or budgeting, whether in the construction phase, or whether you're at the end point of handover and then operations and maintenance, one of our modules in our end-to-end solution will help you deliver and gain those insights to make better decisions. And that's what we look to do across the life cycle in different sectors.
Now, I love your name because it sounds like the word innate, which is INNATE, which is sort of an inborn natural ability. But what's the story behind the name innate?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So it goes back to when the software was first being used on site, and it was in one of the early days, and one of the site managers there said, well, this is fantastic. We can do so much more in a day now, in the 8 hours. And that fed its way back, and it was like, that's a great idea. Why don't we that's the name for the product. Let's call it InEight Software. And that was it. It just, cottoned on from there.
So it's always the simple ideas are the best, as they say.
Absolutely, yeah. If you can stick with them, that's the trick, right?
That's it. Now, how has project management software for the owners, the contractors, engineers, and architects who are building the world around us, how has it evolved over the last 20 years? And what have some of the most notable milestones been along the way?
Well, the short story is it's interesting, two perspectives. In some ways, the fundamentals have never changed, but in so many ways, the methods and the volume has changed dramatically. So the key influences in that, one of the biggest ones is technology and the way that technology has evolved. So there's always been a need and a desire to collect information on a construction site, in a project and engineering environment, because there's so much detail and it's changing so dynamically. So keeping track of that has always been a challenge. So document control and project controls as disciplines have always been there, and it just used to involve a lot more paper
and filing cabinets.
Filing cabinets, drawing racks and cabinets and so on and so forth.
So I was looking at some of those old-timey photos that get sent around email.
Yeah.
And one of them was showing what drafting was done like in the days before AutoCAD. And because, we had skyscrapers, the Empire State Building from memory was built in the 30s, and all that was done long before computers as we know them were around. And they showed these huge rooms with guys sitting in front of huge sheets of paper sort of drawing things. And people sort of forget how far we've come, and we take all this now for granted. So
very much. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's interesting when you look at it, because if you take a $500 million construction project today, and that's mid-size. It's a large number, but it's in construction engineering terms, it's mid-size. So a project like that today would probably generate something in the order of 500,000 plus drawings and documents and so forth. And if you actually printed those, because we did spend some time working this out in the past, if you printed those and you stacked them up, it would be the equivalent of a 12-story building.
Yeah.
So all of that's there. And today you can put all of that on a USB that's, not a whole lot bigger than one of these batteries. So it's, it's amazing how far it's come. And I think it's one of the reasons that volume's increased so dramatically is because it's much easier to create data these days and create data points. So if you think about what happens on a construction site in terms of people taking photos, gathering progress reports, and utilizing revisions of plans and being able to get them in seconds. So as soon as that drawing's been updated, actually being able to access that and see it and validate it as the latest revision on site, all of those things have been enabled by technology. One of the biggest enablers, of course, was the internet. If we go back best part of 21 years, generally. That was the point where companies started to use the internet more frequently to exchange information. And obviously, as speeds increased and capacities increased in that regard, let alone the points where you can access it, that's been another huge enabler. So I'd say those have been the biggest influences, and the level of detail and the level of decision making that can be guided by that data is what's changed. The general principles, however, remain consistent.
I'm sure they have remained consistent since, the pyramids were being built. I mean, that the principles of building have to, it's like the laws of physics, you can't really change them too much, otherwise buildings will fall down.
Well, no, the interesting part in all of that is perhaps one thing that has changed is the ability to test some of that, test some of that engineering. So in a virtual environment, what you can do, of course, is create what's commonly referred to as a digital twin of the real structure.
Yeah.
So we are seeing that used quite extensively now to basically test the design, to test for what's referred to as clash detection, to make sure that when you actually go and build it, there's room to put the joints and the cross sections in place and so forth. And so there is modeling and testing that can be done that does save time in the physical real world construction. So I guess that would also be another big change in perhaps the process overall.
Now, InEight recently announced what it called a game-changing new update. So can you please tell us about this new development, what this means for construction project management, and what makes it different to the rest of the market?
Yeah, well, I think specifically what we're referring to there is what's called time phase budgeting and forecasting for one of our solutions, which is InEight Control. So the overall purpose of that is to help construction projects stay on schedule and on budget.
Yeah, the perennial, bugbears of any project, construction.
Yeah,
and
it is. We actually recently conducted a survey globally and discovered that whilst I think it was about 55% of projects reported that they were on time and on schedule, you kind of go, well, that's the glass half full. But at the same time, you've got obviously close to 50% of projects that are not.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's a perennial problem. So time phase budgeting and forecasting, what it really does is allow stakeholders to proactively take control of the financials with real-time data being collected, and then they can accurately and efficiently track and predict the costs as the project evolves. So one of the key methodologies that we're always challenging the industry with and promoting is to keep your project controls agile in terms of using the data that you're collecting, and don't assume that your plan and project is going to run based on what you originally forecast, but take into account what's evolved in the last couple of days and apply that to your next schedule.
And I'm assuming that obviously it's like having sliders in a accounting package. If you change things, if you change when certain products are due to arrive, whether it's from China or America, wherever it might be, that's going to blow things out or shrink things accordingly. I mean, right now, the world, as we're recording this, is in a crunch where logistics has been slowed down. I was reading an article in news.com.au about how the virus still appearing in some Chinese ports has caused this huge backlog of shipping containers, worse than the Suez Canal, from what they were saying. And so this is slowing down projects. Apparently in some cars in the US, they're being made without the stop-start controller that when you stop at the stoplights, the car stops, and then when you put the foot on the pedal, it starts again. And because of the semiconductor problem, that is causing issues. And I would imagine that smart building devices that are in every smart building now would be similarly affected. And I'm sure your engineers have had to quickly take into account all of these things, and there's probably updates they're working on to handle those sort of situations right now.
Yeah, I think definitely what we've seen anecdotally in the market at least has been the need to adjust schedules based on the availability of materials. It's definitely been a current issue. And it is a good example, because if you look at that and you say, well, okay, now what does it mean? It's being able to adjust the forward-looking outlook and the costs of those materials, and then make the appropriate changes to your schedule and your budget based on those. And if you're at the early phase of a project, being able to build those into your schedules and your budgets, and then in time, hopefully being able to adjust them back. So perhaps there's a chance for some of these projects to actually recover and come in under budget in the end if cost and availability improves over the term of that project.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we were saying, overspending and costs and issues are always causing uncertainty. But if somebody is working on a project right now and they're not using your software, how quickly can they get on board with implementing the InEight's solution suite, importing all the data and all of the designs and maps and plans, and then get that project under control? What would you say to companies that are thinking of doing exactly that?
That are facing those challenges. Yeah. Well, I think it's each individual project has its own challenges and timelines, but in short, realistically, we can get some of those core solutions up and running on a project inside weeks when it comes to solutions such as document control. You can start to implement those solutions in a very short time frame in terms of deploying them and adopting them for estimating as well. So really, it's as fast as that organization's ready to move and ready to establish the baselines and the parameters. What we see more often, though, technology is the case for most software. Technology is, to an extent, the easy part. It's the change within the organization, the change for people. So we're always conscious of that too. So when we get asked that question, we often find ourselves putting the question back to our clients to say, well, how ready is your organization?
Yeah.
Are you ready to change? What's the burning bridge that's going to cause you to adopt and have a champion that's going to take this forward? And that's one of the other factors always, is having it as a primary objective and a benefit of the business is essential. So we always say to businesses, clients and prospects, consider how well it aligns with your business objectives. And we try to look at those rather than just focusing on the pure day-to-day operational aspects, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive it, is a desire to see improvement in their business.
Sure. I mean, a large construction firm would probably have a number of projects on the go, so they can't just wait to finish one project before they start another. So they have to make a decision at some point in time, perhaps finish whatever they're doing using the previous solution, but then move forward. But yes, unless everyone's on board, properly trained, taking it all and using it to its fullest potential, which is always the key. It's like I like to teach people various tricks with their smartphones. It'd be like Albert Einstein would say, we only use 10% of our brains, and it's like the whole famous thing about Microsoft Word. We only ever use 20% of Word, but the saying went, we'll all use a different 20%. It's the same with our smartphones. And I'm sure that you must have customers that are coming back to you asking for updated training as like a refresher on all the things they could be doing with your software that they're not doing, or that they didn't know was possible or wasn't ready yet but is ready now. I mean, there must be this continuous evolution.
Absolutely, there really is. I mean, it's fascinating too. I mean, it's the way that things are adopted is one of those challenges. And actually, a good example of that, we had inside our document solution going back to around 2007. There was a feature that allowed you to start doing markups and comments on the screen. So you could do it. You were talking earlier about those large plans for drawings. So rather than having to print those out and mark them up by hand, you were able to do it on the screen. Even with a PDA back in the day, it was a stylus pen, and then it became a tablet and so on. But we found that the adoption was so poor, and the requirement coming back from customers was, well, we still like to print it. And it's like, okay. So we actually had to put a print button in to enable people to print, mark up, scan, and put it back into the solution as a printed, scanned, and marked up copy. So it probably took, I would say, best part of 10 years of that feature being around before it really got used and adopted in any anger. And there'll be features that we've built into the solutions today that I think we'll see an acceleration, but that same thing will occur. So using GIS data and being able to capture information via the phone and the camera and associate that with a particular lot and segment of road or building. All of those things are used, but we're seeing the adoption pick up over years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's only in the latest version of iPad OS 15, which is only available as a developer beta as we speak. The public beta is not available yet, and it won't come out to the public until September or October. But you can grab your stylus and swipe from the bottom right or left-hand corner, and a little note pops up. And this can be on top of any app that supports that. And obviously that's things like Safari, but in theory, all apps will have that. And so this ability to have like a super notebook that you could just invoke from anywhere, I mean, that's still something that, Apple is introducing as a new feature that people, won't be using in large part for a few months yet. So that whole digitizing the way we think is still an ongoing process. And of course, being able to take photos and add it all in. Well, it's like what I'm trying to say is it's not new, but it's still new.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think to that point, I mean, personally, I'm keeping a keen eye on how we manage the inputs to the solution. And I think what we've been keen to do at InEight is develop the back end of the applications that you can adapt based on that input device. And so, whether you're recording data points, and it doesn't matter what that data is, the database is collecting it and associating it through the metadata to whatever it is you're concerned about on the project. So being able to do it as a photo with the camera, being able to do it as a voice recording, being able to enter that and have it appear as a Word document or a PDF or whatever you choose. And then ultimately having that interface become the 3D model. I think that's where we'll get to. It's still sort of much talked about, much hyped, but the reality is that there's still a long way to go in the adoption of models. But ultimately, I'd see those becoming the interface, and then you get into sort of a Minority Report environment with the virtual vision in front of you, the heads up, that allows you to navigate the progress against the project and the details within it and drill down. I don't think we're that far off. No. It's the database is behind it. It's the interface and the adoption that needs to catch up, but I think that's a matter of years, not decades.
Yeah, well, certainly this decade, because I mean we've had the false starts with the Oculus and Google and Samsung headsets that are sort of half taken off, and some of them disappeared. And Apple's supposed to come out with its headset, and Microsoft has a HoloLens, but you still don't have something that is just as accessible and inexpensive as a smartphone. But yeah, that's got to be happening this decade for sure. Are there any projects or customers you'd like to highlight, be they in Australia, the region, or the world?
Yeah, look, there are. I think there's clients that are doing things in a very pioneering way. And as I mentioned, we're always conscious to challenge how things are done from a project controls point of view. And we do have some clients that in turn are challenging the industry and challenging us.
Yeah. Clients are your best. One of those, clients are the best harbingers of the future. They're your best research and development department because they're using it and finding ways that you never thought they were going to use it. And they were saying, well, we want to do this. And so I'm sure that some of your best features have come from client demand, not just the brains of your own
undoubtedly. Yeah. Undoubtedly. So I guess one of those certainly would be Sydney Water. I think we started working with Sydney Water last year on a 10-year, $10 billion program of work. Mm-hmm. And what's been most innovative from their perspective is really the contracting approach. So it sounds a bit dry, but it actually means a lot, because what they were keen to do was find a very collaborative and trusting platform as a way to share information with the collaborators. So bearing in mind, this is a $10 billion 10-year program of work. They have 3 what they call regional delivery consortia, who are made up of Australia's top 14 operators in construction and as contractors. So we've got all these parties coming together. So you can imagine the challenge. You've got all these different methodologies, all these different objectives, and public companies in many cases who are all working together, but at the same time have their own primary objectives. And we're asking them to share information, and Sydney Water are asking them to provide visibility of progress and cost against each of these portions of work. So it's been a really interesting challenge in the last year to deploy our end-to-end solution and have it operate with all of those parties in a effectively single platform, each with their own discrete environment, but at the same time being able to share information. So there's an element of trust, but there's also transparency and there's visibility. So that, I think, is a really good example of an organization, of an entity that is driving forward and being quite pioneering. Encouragingly, I think we're also seeing that from other government owned entities. So a number of the government or the state government transport authorities are being very progressive in the way they're approaching project controls. We've seen that in New South Wales, been working with them for over just around a decade now, seeing it in Victoria as well, and Western Australia and Queensland. Each of those states have got a vision for what they're calling their digital engineering vision and their digital engineering frameworks. And that's really encouraging because they're showing the value. They understand the value of the project data, and they understand that that's as integral part of it as the nuts and bolts and tarmac and curbs are. It's understanding how that asset has come together, and that is in turn really driving our development, because we're needing to respond to what they need to do to collect that data and then be able to organize and manage it, not just through construction, but into operations.
Yeah, I would imagine that the scale of some of these projects just simply was not possible in the way that you're doing it now, thanks to the evolution of the technology. I mean, just couldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Each of these mega projects, and sometimes, Sydney Water, 10 billion, Transport for New South Wales have got projects ranging from anywhere between 2 and 20 billion in operations and construction right now. Same for Victoria. So all of these projects, you're right, they all used to be smaller projects that were built up as sub-projects. And in some ways that hasn't changed. I guess because they have to be managed as sub-projects, because you've got a number of different contractors specializing, but in the end they roll into one. And that's where the data collection comes into its own. So as you start to roll all that information up and you consider that you've now got millions of data points and potentially tens of thousands of people operating and working on it, being able to consolidate that information and roll it up and aggregate it and provide progress reports as instantly as end of day or next morning, rather than having to wait weeks, that's what's making the difference.
Now, we've also heard a lot about how COVID over the last 18 months has done a lot of digital acceleration. Things have been brought forward. Features that were, not being used were suddenly being used wildly. Video conferencing's gone crazy. Are there any, in brief, examples where COVID has improved the way InEight is doing things and sped things up or changed the way that you do things? I mean, I can see you're at home, so you're probably working from home is the one that it's for everybody.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I mean, from a business point of view, from our business point of view, it was, like so many, we had to pivot very quickly. Very pleasingly for us, what we discovered was that we were already really very well equipped to do that, at least from a technology point of view. I mean, there's no doubt that there was a lot of adjustment necessary for our people,
everyone.
And but from a technology point of view, we were able to really within a week get ourselves set up in teams and operating with a good cadence of contact in this way, the same way we're communicating now. And so that's become very normal. And there's been some great sides to that, because it's actually improved things where people used to perhaps talk on the phone. They're now connecting, at least seeing each other, even if it's not in person. From a business point of view, we did see an uptick in the way that our solution was adopted for a number of different projects and in a number of different ways. So we saw user numbers increase quite dramatically. We saw that the use of correspondence modules and the amount of collaboration that was occurring, even reviews, as I was talking about, those being conducted virtually, and the use of those processes and workflows, we saw a quite serious uptick in all of that. And so it's been really interesting. And then at a more macro level, it's been a good time for us too, because there's been a lot of investment from government in infrastructure projects. And that's an area where we have a very good reputation and a lot of very good relationships with those government departments. And that applies here in Australia more than anywhere. But that reputation is global. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in Asia Pacific around a number of major transport projects. And of course, North America, where InEight's got a very solid brand name, is being used by contractors as they're picking up work for all of those projects there too.
And in Australia, and I'm assuming in other parts of the world, the construction industry was a one of those important ones where construction projects generally didn't stop; they just kept going with the appropriate controls.
Essential business, and so that kept us very busy. In fact, our teams really, one of the big challenges for them was adapting to engage with customers and to deploy everything remotely. We would typically have gone and spent a couple of days sitting down with customers to walk through the deployment program and methodology. So having to do that remotely caused us to need to adapt, but there was a great demand for it. You're right, because nothing stopped. But our clients had the same challenge because they then had people spread across home offices as well as work sites, as well as limited numbers in offices. And they had to bring everyone together to begin using our solution and deploy it across the various workflows that they had. So interesting time, but quite empowering, and it's definitely been challenging in many respects beyond just the typical adoption rates of software. It's caused us to learn a lot.
Now, I'm sure regular customers will know, and I'm sure it's on the InEight.com website, but when is your next conference or annual roadshow? When's the next event happening?
Yeah, well, that's another thing that's really been impacted in the last year.
It's all gone virtual.
That's the thing, isn't it? We had annual events. We had some global events that we were working up to through 2019, and there were great numbers and great forums, really exciting. But what we've moved to now is a more dynamic approach to engage audiences. So we do have a number of different webinars and events that we're conducting online, and one of the things that we're keen to do there is to involve customers and provide forums for some panel discussion and really engender some different perspectives. So it's not just about us, but it's understanding and letting other customers hear what other people in their industry are going through. But we do have some events coming up in the next few weeks. One of those is actually on what data owners need from their contractors. So we've got a panel of experts there from InEight, but also including Microsoft and Makati Development, and that one will be taking place on the 22nd of June. And then through our website, we'll have a whole series of events that people will be able to check in and participate in and listen in on, both in this time zone here in Australia, across Asia Pacific, and in North America.
Now, as we get towards the end of the interview, I always like to just talk about you a little bit and ask you to share the memory of the first computer that you had.
My first, I can do better than just share a memory, actually, Alex.
Oh, okay.
let me just scoot across here for a second.
Sure, yeah, go. It's all right. We get to see it. We get to see it live. Okay, let's have a look there. Is that a ZX Spectrum?
To you, I grew up in the UK.
Yeah.
So my first computer was one of these.
Sinclair, the ZX Spectrum, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Sinclair ZX Spectrum.
Yeah, with the little rubbery chiclet keys.
That's the one. It had 128K of memory.
I just moved my the picture of me up to the top there so people can see that. Yeah, and it had the beautiful the rainbow colours on the side there.
Absolutely, yeah, quite gorgeous design. 128K of memory. I think you had a number of games that you could choose from that loaded via a tape cassette player.
Do you remember typing them in from those magazines? You have to type in the games and.
Oh yeah. In fact, I think I've got one of those magazines somewhere too, but I won't bother trying to dig that out. But right, so fascinating. So that was my first computer, and obviously quite sentimental value. It's I've kept it with me for the last 30 something years. Yeah.
And what was your first memory of going online?
Going online. So going online,
that would have been 15 years later, probably.
Well, yeah, it's going to age me, obviously. So yes, I remember that when I was at university, actually being introduced to the internet by, appropriately or not, one of our university librarians, who sat us down in front of the PCs and showed us. I wish I could remember what the platform was that we were using, but it was one of those early day.
Was it NCSA Mosaic, or was it?
Mosaic sounds very familiar.
Yeah, because that was the first browser. It would have been probably on a school Unix system or Windows computers.
Yes, yeah. Well, I remember him talking to us about it and saying, basically, the internet could be a lot of fun, but it's never going to replace the library. And and he had a point to an extent, because I remember he was talking about the credibility and being able to vouch for the articles that are recorded in the university library versus the uncontrolled environment of the internet. So he had a point.
And then I always like to, from the past to the future, how do you see InEight evolving over the next couple of years, and then the industry through to, say, 2030? And by that I mean, the industry you're in, the construction industry, and everything that's revolving around that.
Well, I think we're in an interesting. I always like to think of this as an interesting overlap of two industries, because if we think about the industry that we're in, which is clearly software development, but the industry that we serve being construction and engineering, and I think there's a lot of change ahead for both. I think what we're seeing in construction and engineering is a move towards more prefabrication, that virtual build ahead of physical build, the more strenuous scheduling and planning of projects that is continually called for. And I think if we look at other industries, we can see where they move through a life cycle and come out with a slightly different profile. And I often like to look at manufacturing as a comparison to construction and engineering, because I think if you look at that industry, you can see, going back over a few decades, it was a messier, more random, less specific, less scientific industry as a whole. And today it's a whole lot more predictable, very much controlled, great visibility of process. And I think we should expect to see more of that happening in construction and engineering, so that there's more traceability, visibility, automation, and so forth, because it needs to be there. And I think the industry is calling out for it, and the owners are calling out for it. So that plays very well for us, because that's what we're about. We're here to serve that demand as it grows, and the technology that enables a lot of those things to be used and adopted more widely. We know that will come. It's already here in many cases. So I think we'll see those as key themes. It's going to be visibility, accountability, and automation, if we wanted to put three words to it. And I think that would apply to both our business and the construction industry.
And it also makes me think of, I've seen some of those demo videos of really sort of primitive 3D printing machines that can print buildings. I mean, primitive compared to what they're going to be in the future. We probably have to wait until the 2040s or the 2050s to sort of see them at the industrial scale that really will make a difference to build, huge buildings.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think, it's surprising how much of that is already in sort of early stages. When you look at, there's a number of buildings now that, and organizations that are gearing themselves up as pioneers of prefabricated construction. So you have the situation already where there's components of buildings and components of infrastructure, including tunnels, that are manufactured off-site and even overseas, and then shipped in. Everything is coded, barcoded, QR coded, RFID tagged, Bluetooth tagged, whatever it needs to be to trace it through the whole process, including from when it left the factory to when it arrives on site, and then located and put in place based on GIS, GPS data as well. So, when those sort of things start to happen, you see a rapid improvement in the efficiency, and it's really not that far away. I think I would say we might be able to shave a decade off that.
Okay, and let's hope so.
And see those things happen.
The 2030s, here we come. So
yeah, absolutely.
My second last question is simply to ask, what's the best piece of advice you received in life to help you get where you are today? Well,
there's two people I'll draw from on that. I guess the theme is the same for both. So one was a gentleman called Peter Clemenger. And for those in Australia, you might be familiar with Clemenger Advertising. He was a bit of an icon of business going through the, I would say, 60s, 70s, 80s, certainly. I was fortunate enough to meet him in the 90s while I was working at Clemenger for a short time while I was at uni, and sat down with him. And one of the best bits of advice he gave me that stuck with me is be patient and but work hard. So essentially, that, to put some context to it, he was talking about how people in their younger years are often in a hurry to climb the work ladder and receive gratification. And he was basically saying, be patient about that. Don't expect the instant gratification. Don't expect the instant progress. But put in the work, and it will come. And learn as you go. And that's what leads me to my other reference, which would be my grandma, who taught me to be inquisitive. And I think, she sat down with me from the age of 8, and we'd read the newspaper and talk about the topics of the day. And that just led me to be perpetually inquisitive about things and to challenge, test, and learn. So I think between those two, they stood me very well.
One of my favourite little sayings is that for the modern youth, instant gratification is not instant enough. And so they need to learn some of their patience.
As I said it, I was thinking it hasn't got any easier, has it? I mean, it's today's more about instantaneous than it was 30 years ago. Yeah. But I think it's still remained a good bit of advice.
Yeah. And so my final question to you is, what is your final message to iTWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
Well, I'd say it is to, I guess you triggered some thoughts in the last couple of minutes, but I'd say to keep learning, but to keep challenging at the same time, because you only get those innovations and improvements by doing that. If you settle for the status quo, then that's what you will have. And I think we've seen it with our customers and within our business. If you continue to think and challenge and don't assume that you've got the best performance in front of you now, without getting yourself tied up in knots and overly frustrated, I think you can still find improvements. And so I would encourage everyone to do that, to challenge the status quo in terms of reaching the objectives that you have, and don't assume that it can't be done.
Well, Rob Bryant, Senior Vice President for the APJ region at InEight's Software, thank you very much for your time. I hope we can speak again in the future, and best of luck for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, be a pleasure to do that. It's been fun catching up with you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.